Hi, everybody. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology. It is December 30th today, 2019, just a little bit of time left in the year. And today I'm making a preview of the astrology of 2020. So we'll be taking a look at all of the major transits from January of 2020 all the way through December of 2020. I am not doing a blow-by-blow of each month because I do that already throughout the year. And I make a monthly overview throughout the year for you to follow along with. This is just a video to give you the big highlights of 2020. And as usual, my take is not, it's not unique. It's not the same as everyone else either. You know, you'll see that I probably agree with a lot of astrologers about what some of the big transits are, but in other ways, my selections of which transits I'm following may be different. So I invite you to also, as the year goes on, watch each of the monthly overview videos. And then month by month, as you watch my channel, you'll notice that whatever transits I mention at the start of the month, typically I'll do a video, if not a couple of videos sometimes, diving in depth into each of the transits. So pay attention to those as the year goes on. All right. Before I dive into today's talk on the astrology of 2020, I want to remind you that there are just 43 hours left to go in my annual Kickstarter. We are at 578 backers. Our final stretch goal is 600 backers. That means 22 more backers before midnight tomorrow. I think we can get there. I never would have imagined we'd be closing in on 600 backers. That's crazy and awesome. And I'm deeply thankful for all of your support. Remember, a couple of cool things coming up in the new year. In June of 2020 and November of 2020, I have my next sections of the Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic course, which is a one-year certification course that I teach in ancient Hellenistic astrology with a strong dose of ancient spiritual philosophy from both the East and the West. Most of you know I practice yoga, so you get a strong spiritual foundation for your practice of ancient astrology. Those two courses are 50% off through my Kickstarter until tomorrow night at midnight. So you have a little bit of time left to take advantage of that. The price goes up when registration opens in March. And you can also get 50% off of my advanced programs. I have a year 2 program and a horary astrology course. Those are both a year long. You can check out all of the courses on the certification course tab of my website, which is nightlightastrology.com. So check those out. There's some reward readings you can pick up. Just a little bit of time left to pitch in. And also, when you bundle my courses, if you take the first and second year together, there you get even a larger discount. If you bundle all 3 together, you get the biggest discount. So some really good deals going on until tomorrow night. If you appreciate my work, pitch in, share, like, subscribe. It really helps. I thank you all so much for the huge turnout of support, and promise to give you my best in 2020. Remember, the other thing that's cool is coming up in 2020 is, for those of you who are interested in Bhakti Yoga, which is the form of yoga that I personally practice, I will be, for those who are subscribed to my newsletter, I have a new website that'll be coming out hopefully in early February. And on that website, on the current website too, you can sign up for my newsletter. And when you do, you'll have access to private content that I'm making exclusively on Bhakti Yoga and astrology for those who are interested. So that's going to be kind of a private content that I'll be producing alongside of the regular content that I produce in 2020. So those are some cool things to look forward to. The other thing to look forward to is on January 8th, Wednesday evening, we have a panel of amazing astrologers getting together to talk about the transit of Saturn and Pluto. They're coming into a conjunction on January 12th. That'll form a part of the overview of January that I talk about. I'll talk about it a little bit today as well. It's a panel of, I think, 7 or 8 of us, professional astrologers, who will be discussing the ins and outs of this transit. And it's open, free to the public. We're going to gather some donations to give to charity during the event, but otherwise just come for free. You can check that out on the events page of my website, where you can find the live Zoom login link. And that's at nightlightastrology.com, and go to the events page. The other thing is that in coming up in the new year, I have a new series starting on the nodes of the moon in ancient astrology. That's a 3-part workshop series that I'm doing. So those are all the announcements. I wanted to say them because it's almost the new year. A lot of people listen to this video, so I want to make sure I get all that out there. But let's dive into talking about the biggest transits of 2020. I'm going to start with January. And of course, like I said, I'm not going to cover the blow by blow. That would take me, half a day. So I'm going to cover the big transits for the year and talk about the big themes that I think come along with these transits. So let's begin. I don't know why May is on the board here. Okay, here we go. So here we go on, you can see January 1st is up on the screen here. We have basically two major events in January. One is, and this is occupying a huge amount of my time that I've already spent a lot of time on these two events in December. So you can go into my archives and find a series of 4 talks on Saturn and Pluto's conjunction, which is coming up on January 12th. And we also have a lunar eclipse on January 10th. Those two events back to back really form the astrological heart or center of the month of January in 2020. So I can just give you a sense of what that looks like here. I'll move the time clock so you can see. So here we go on January 10th. This is the lunar eclipse. You can see a lunar eclipse. Any full moon is always opposite, exactly opposite the degree of the sun in the zodiac. And the full moon, when it's also in close enough proximity to the nodes of the moon, north or south node, will create a lunar eclipse. Same thing with a new moon. If it's in close enough proximity with the south or north node of the moon, will create a solar eclipse. So we've got a lunar eclipse in the sign of Cancer coming through on January 10th. Then, right after that, 2 days later, we're going to see the conjunction of Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn at 22 degrees, about 46 minutes. So January 10th and January 12th, lunar eclipse followed by the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. What can we say about this? Well, first of all, the Cancer-Capricorn axis is highlighted right now and will be going into 2020 because we've got a few more eclipses in June and even into July that are taking place across the Capricorn and Cancer axis. So Capricorn and Cancer form the Saturn-Moon axis. And this is challenging because the moon, generally speaking, was considered the ruler of the realm of fortune, or the constantly changing fluxional circumstances of the material world. So anytime Cancer is highlighted, you're often dealing with those kinds of circumstances in the material world that are most familiar to us, most comfortable to us, and that we seek out in order to feel emotionally secure in the world. For example, home, your living situation, your health and the wellness of your body or your immediate environment and its feeling of safety, protection, or stability, your family, your parents, your mother, as well as ancestral issues, sometimes genetic, hereditary kinds of issues, cultural, tribal, community, or cultural issues, things that have to do with the way we define a sense of niche or belonging within this world. And why do we do so? Because the world is constantly changing. So Cancer not only represents the general state of flux in the material world, which the moon has rulership over, but also the need to, once the umbilical cord is cut, there's still a psychic impetus in life to stay connected to the womb. And that takes the shape of family or friends or the health or safety of our body. And of course, many different kinds of illnesses and neuroses and all sorts of things are rooted in not feeling safe in the world or not feeling like we have some connection to a safe place. So while the North Node right now is emphasizing the hunger that we may have for some sense of belonging, tribe, home, within this constantly changing material energy, the South Node in Capricorn and the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn have to do with the hard, icy, cold, wintry reality of impermanence, death, decay, old age, disease, but also the wisdom of experience and time and the hard, cold facts of reality and the way that we learn and grow from them. So while Cancer might be actively seeking out a sense of home and stability, Capricorn with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction might be dealing up some very deep levels of disillusionment, impermanence, destruction of familiar structures, traditions, routines, habits, disillusionment with the status quo. And that's not easy for Cancer, whose tendency is to seek out an immediate, familiar, and sometimes sort of cozy, safe place. So it's an interesting space. I would call what we're in January, at the very least, a transitional space, a space where we may want to seek out that which is comfortable and safe, and getting to a feeling as though we've arrived back in the womb, whatever that metaphorical womb is. And the lunar eclipse in Cancer is forcing that, as lunar eclipses tend to bring about significant turning points in material circumstance, meaning the things around us, not necessarily us and our will, but the environment around us is shifting in some way, dramatically sometimes, especially in a cardinal sign like Cancer, where things tend to be boom and off to the races. Very dramatic turning points. The Capricorn axis, on the other hand, has to do with, the sober, long-term, realistic thinking, dismantling of structures with Saturn and Pluto's conjunction on January 12th, and kind of sobering up and dealing with the need to let go of things that may be too infantile or emotionally insecure, etc. But also, the balance can go in the opposite direction, where you don't want to be so cold and hard, and that things may be difficult, but you don't want that to you don't want to be so cold and detached that you're not aware of the need that you have for safety, emotional connection, affection, tenderness, taking things slow. So it's an interesting time right now, where it's like, okay, we've got to grow up, we've got to be serious. There's big changes happening, some of which are difficult and very sobering and very hard. But there's also this, and those changes may come because of sudden dramatic shifts in our environment. But remember that in the long run, we're trying to create a plan that also honors the need that we have to create some sense of rhythm, safety, connectedness, nurturance, etc. Now, I want to jump ahead a little bit here and say that these same themes will repeat on the following dates, when we have a solar eclipse, or excuse me, a lunar eclipse on June 21st in Cancer, and then a solar eclipse in Capricorn on July 5th. So you're going to see the themes that I'm talking about right now are reiterated, and then there's another wave of dealing with the exact same themes and the same storyline playing out from the summer solstice through Cancer season in July. And we're really going to be watching probably all the way until August, September, October, as this whole story plays out. So these, in my opinion, this is the biggest transit of the year, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, because it's really challenging the fundamental structures of our lives, especially those that are related to our sense of belonging, security, where is home, what feels safe, what gives me an emotional sense of connection to the world around me, and some really deep, intense learning lessons and maturing happening around those things. It's a year of emotional maturity, but also making sure that we are not, if we're shell-shocked by changes, that we're not becoming hard-hearted, or that we're not making decisions based out of fear and emotional reactivity. Just get me to safety as quickly as possible, when we might need a long-term plan to make a deeper and more substantive change in our lives to create that long-term sense of at-homeness in life that we're looking for. So January, but repeating in late June around the summer solstice, and then July 5th with the solar eclipse. Because the same eclipse as lunar eclipse in Cancer, solar eclipse in Capricorn, June 21st, July 5th. Okay, so that starts the year and really carries over through the whole year, because eclipses kind of, sometimes people say they burn holes in the sky. They burn holes in the birth chart. There is no denying that this is a year of structural transformation, and that it's sobering. That's the key word I keep coming back to personally, is that this is a transit that is not going to make you feel entirely safe or good, or it's not going to be a cozy blanket type of year. But we're working toward that with the ability to take the lessons that come. And so we can't become cynical. We can't quit, and we can't become emotionally reactive. We have to receive the lessons, try to see them as a form of cosmic mercy, cosmic sensitivity training, cosmic blessings, even if they're hard, and then craft a plan, a mature, sober, long-term plan to create the changes that we're looking for that can carry us through those summer months when the same themes come up again. All right, let's move forward into March. Next major transit on my watch is in the month of March, and it is the initial entrance of the planet Saturn into Aquarius. So this happens, let's see, on March 21st. Here we go. Let's turn the clock a bit, and you'll see Saturn pop into Aquarius. All right, so let me put this up on the screen again. I'm getting over a cold still. Okay, there's Saturn entering Aquarius on March 21st into the 22nd. Now, this transit is temporary. Saturn's ingress into Aquarius is not going to last that long. If you take it forward just a little bit, we're going to see Saturn stationing by about the middle of May. So, we have from late March, right around the spring equinox, into about the beginning of May. 2021 is a year of Saturn and Jupiter square Uranus. And you're going to get a little bit of a taste for that at the beginning of this transit as Saturn enters Aquarius and starts a square to Uranus, the gist of which is traditions, structures, discipline, commitments versus innovation, newness, rebellion, defiance, breaking free of limiting circumstances. Okay, so we have the push-pull between tradition, more conservative, and more moderate even qualities versus radical, innovative, freedom-seeking qualities. You're going to start to feel that tension right away in March, April, and the beginning of May, but it'll back off because Saturn is going to turn retrograde and then back right out of Aquarius. And then this theme that I'm talking about right now between sort of convention and innovation is really intense in 2021. Even the very end of 2020 in December, you'll start feeling it when both Jupiter and Saturn enter Aquarius and start the square to Uranus and Taurus. But you're really going to feel that one in 2021. So in March, April, and May, Saturn enters Aquarius. And this is interesting because Saturn's preferred domicile traditionally of the two was the masculine air sign of Aquarius. And this is, you just get a little bit less of a broody Saturn and a little bit less of a reactive Saturn. And by that, I mean, think of Saturn like the Hermit card in the tarot, right? So if you think of the Hermit card in the tarot, you're thinking of at its best, Saturn as the image of the old, wise, aged, mature, experienced, and oftentimes very mystical figure who might be more isolated or introverted, introspective, objective, rational, sometimes detached, not necessarily of this world. That's the traditional sort of mystical Saturn. It's one of the reasons why Saturn rejoices in the 12th house as well, but that's another story. Saturn in Aquarius gives us this very broad, lofty, intellectual position. You're going to see, for example, Saturn in Aquarius emphasizing the strength of our mind and the strength of our intellectual commitments, as well as the willingness to build a slow, methodical, sort of vast structure. Saturn in Aquarius is like an engineer in that regard. And oftentimes for things that are truly innovative or different. The reasons for this are sort of complex, but Aquarius is a sign that, for example, it has to do with the cupbearer of the gods, or the water pourer. And this was a youth, a picture of a Greek youth who was selected by the gods as being more than human, and sort of the ideal human who could serve the gods. But this human is sort of cursed because you're ideal enough to rise above the humans and go be the servant of the gods, but you're in a sort of diminished role as a servant of the gods. You don't quite fit in with the gods. You're not a god. And yet, because you have this sort of elevated status, you're unique and special, you don't quite fit in with humans. So Aquarians often find themselves personality-wise and archetypally, we often find Aquarian energy as sort of pressing the ideal, pressing that thing which is closer to godliness or the future or something that seems rather progressive or elevated compared to the status quo. And yet there's something about that elevation that is marked. It's marked out, it's set aside, it doesn't fit in, it might be ostracized. So you're going to start seeing the importance of the ostracized position or the progressive point of view, but also the dogma, sometimes the irony that progressive things can become really dogmatic as well. You're going to start seeing that step up a lot in March, April, and May. Not surprisingly, during the Democratic primaries, you may see a more progressive but very firm candidate emerge, like say Bernie Sanders. At the same time, you can see this with conservative. It doesn't matter if one is conservative or liberal, Democrat or Republican or anything else. The position might be one of surprising, kind of attractive innovativeness, but also some kind of crusty dogmatic qualities at the same time. Aquarius can carry both, but it is going to be a time where watch what whole sign house Saturn is ingressing into in your birth chart, because, you know, for example, it's progressing into my career house. So you might see, I might see shifts in you might too, shifts in my career around that time, different things that I'm doing or innovating or whatever. And just trying to do that balance between something that's progressive and something that's grounded and committed, disciplined, but maybe visionary. So that's a unique blend. And that blend is going to be intensified quite dramatically in 2021 when Saturn gets into the square with Uranus, where you have more emphasis on progress, revolution, and enlightenment, but you also have this kind of lockdown conservative quality at the same time, disciplined. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You're just looking, sometimes it's like, how can I be progressive but grounded in what I'm doing? Like I have a great idea, but I might need to build it step by step by step. So those two qualities of Saturn and Uranus are going to start combining in the early spring as well. Again, look to the whole sign house that Saturn is ingressing into in order to get a sense of where that sense of structural, visionary, building, committing, but also maybe slightly deviant or outside of the box qualities are manifesting. So that's happening March 21st into about the middle of April until Saturn turns retrograde and it's going to back out of Aquarius. Going forward, in April, let me show you guys this one on the screen. April 4th, we also have a conjunction between Jupiter and Pluto. Now, this is another big one. We've got, there's no shortage of big transits this month, especially with the outer planets. This year, Next year. It's not this year yet, is it? Okay. Okay, so here it is. Okay, there we go. So check this out. I'm going to do a diamond around it. Let's try a diamond. Oh, there we go. Look at that. So there's a diamond around, let's see if I can, oh, you can build lots of diamonds. Wow. I didn't know you could do that. All right, here, let's see if I can do it. All right, so Jupiter and Pluto will be getting together on April 4th. So that transit, it builds up for a while. So if you go about 3 degrees back, that's when you'll really feel it starting to express itself. And that's because we have about a 3-degree rule in ancient astrology called the period of engagement. And this starts in about mid-March, March 12th. And it finally, you get the conjunction right around April 4th. And then you're going to give it a 3-degree orb of separation for the separating period, which is often where the fruit's sort of falling off the tree. And that takes us, all the way through what? About May, right? End of May. But then the interesting thing is Jupiter turns retrograde. And then Jupiter's retrograde takes it backward through the engagement to Pluto. And there it is, conjoining with Pluto again at the end of June. And then the 3-degree rule applies again. I'm going to go all the way down to about 20 degrees. And that takes us all the way through the end of July. Okay, so take that all together now. You're talking about the beginning of March all the way through the end of July. Pluto and Jupiter are within 3 degrees, which for ancient astrologers meant they were definitely doing things. Okay, so that the 3-degree range applying, separating, and then retrograde applying, and then retrograde separating, that goes all the way through the end of July. Oh, wait, but it gets better. Then we're going to, if we keep taking the planet forward just a little bit, kind of gets out of that range but into August. But then guess what? By September, it's turning direct. And then it's going to move into that 3-degree range again by about the middle of October. And then the middle of October takes us all the way. Here it is. There's their conjunction again, coming up around November 12th. And then the 3-degree range of separation takes us all the way into December. So I don't think that I'm exaggerating when I say that from about the beginning of March all the way through the end of the year, with maybe September, August, September being like quieting down a little bit, Jupiter and Pluto are in a conjunction like all year long. And so, you know, this is another one of the most major transits of the year. Well, what can you take from Jupiter and Pluto? First of all, Jupiter and Pluto is a transit we don't talk a lot about. We talk a lot about Saturn and Pluto and Uranus and Pluto, and, you know, once in a while someone will talk about Neptune and Pluto. But Jupiter and Pluto is really unique because what we're talking about is, okay, Jupiter, which represents, broadly speaking, in each individual's life, it looks different. Every culture, city, nation, etc. This can be applied differently, but the general archetypal meaning has to do with that broad sense of collective morality, such as a justice system, the constitution or a government, the legal system in general, the institutions of academics, higher learning, religion. So anything that gives us a larger, more coherent sense of moral and spiritual order in the universe, in the cosmos. Again, that could be religion, but it also has to do with institutes of higher learning. It also has to do with our sense of justness and fairness in a broad way. Pluto is, of course, the lord of the underworld, which means that our sense of morality, our philosophical commitments, our religious and spiritual commitments, academic experiences, teachers in our lives, etc., can go through a very deep and intense transformation. You can see the death of teachers. You can see deep transformative healing experiences with teachers. You can see deep purgings of religious academic institutions. You can see deep transformations on the level of government, or the codes, laws, and rules or regulations of government. You can see the darkness, Pluto, of supposed moral authority figures, spiritual authority figures, or academic authority figures, where you're basically seeing corruption being exposed. You can also look at it as a crisis of faith, as a deep lesson with Saturn, or excuse me, with Jupiter in its fall in Saturn, a deep lesson around our own moral compass, or our sense of who and what constitute trustworthy systems of spiritual, academic, legal authority. So it can be quite a kind of ethical, intellectual transformation, right? So really profound. And it's also a time where people can get incredibly dogmatic about things that are really heavy and dark. It can also be a time where teachers come into your life and challenge you to look at the world in a way that you need to in order to grow up, like sobering teachers who come in and help you purge and really look at things that you haven't been looking at. And the teacher doesn't have to be a person either. It could be a system, or a religious path, or a spiritual path, or something like that. So this is also the dark prophet. Jupiter and Pluto together have that sense of being able to darker omens, darker prophecies, but the wisdom of being able to see truth in darkness, or truth, and to learn and grow from the exposure of dark things to the light. That's Jupiter, Pluto as well. So that's in effect all year long. Like I said, pretty much from around the time that Jupiter and Pluto first conjoin, April 4th. It gets started in early March, goes all the way into December when they're within 3 degrees. So that's a powerful transit all year long. Now, the next one that I have in May is Venus's retrograde in the sign of Gemini. So Venus's retrograde in the sign of Gemini, let's see, that takes place. I'm not going to show this one on the screen. It's pretty basic. Venus retrogrades, where is it? May 13th. And, you know, that'll last into June. And the Venus retrograde, simplest, you know, Venus retrogrades are not uncommon, but the simplest way is to look at the Gemini house that you, whole sign house in your chart. It's the third house. It might have to do with siblings or neighbors or your immediate environments. Your fourth house, your home, your family, like that. Your seventh house, relationships. Your first house, maybe health or identity or your wardrobe. Your 10th house, career. 11th house, friends and groups of people, etc. But you're looking at Venus retrograde, interestingly, during that period of time in a square to Neptune in Pisces. So we're also looking at the question of ideals. Who is the ideal lover? What is the ideal friendship? Where are the ideal groups of people in my life? What is the ideal beauty? What is the ideal Venus Neptune seeks perfection. It's looking, as Liz Green once wrote, it's looking for Eden, the paradise. And so paradise, but Venus retrograde also implies reversals, dramatic changes. And these could be changes that are intellectual, communicative, where we're learning or our minds are changing, and it's shifting our sense of what the ideal looks like in all manners of relationships, whether they be group relationships, community relationships, friendships, love, and so forth. So deeper questions around that time, because Mercury, this is a Mercury ruled sign of Gemini, loves to ask questions, deeper questions, deeper thinking, deeper communicating, and shifting around what our ideals are. And also some healthy degree of disillusionment around our ideals in love and relationships in general, because Neptune presents the ideal. But remember, we live in a world that's not perfect. And so Venus Neptune sometimes is just a little too perfect for this world. So we have to be careful about sort of idealizations, the striving for perfection that sometimes is very intolerant. It's not a mistake that Neptune has a long history of being involved in genocide, for example, and massive amounts of death. And people don't realize that. But one of the reasons for that is that Neptune is idealistic. When a tyrant gets the idea in their mind that there's only one true race that's beautiful, you know, even though Neptune has this lofty, we like to talk about it like this lofty, beautiful, you know, spiritual planet, but no, it's also about the danger of idealism, the intoxication, the poison of idealism. Think of how many Jewish people were poisoned, you know, and this is the World War II, strong signatures around Neptune during World War II. A great book on that is, again, I've mentioned this before, but Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas, who does a long sort of biography of Neptune transits and their involvement in wars, oftentimes that have to do with, you know, really lofty sense of idealism that can fuel amazing amounts of hatred in the world. So you have to be careful around this Venus retrograde in Gemini during the month of May and into June, because Venus is during that whole time moving through a square with Neptune in Pisces. So idealism, disillusionment, especially around love, relationships, maybe some changes around things like money, with Venus in Gemini's sign being a sign that has a lot to do with the marketplaces and money and transfer of goods and services, intellectual things, other matters like that, technology as well. We will, and it could be that there's some really interesting and beautiful pieces of art that come about during that time as well, because even though Venus Neptune may be idealistic, there's also this really amazing connection to art and to things that are really truly beautiful, and so we may see some really truly spectacular forms of art or receive some amazing artistic inspiration during that time as well. So that's May and June. Now, when we get into June, on June 5th, we're starting to get our eclipses across the Sagittarius and Gemini axis as the nodes are just starting to change signs. And the first one will be on June 5th. It'll be a solar eclipse in Sagittarius. I'll show you this one on the screen so you can see it. So there we go. All right, let me put this back up on the screen now. Okay, so here's June 5th, and you're going to see a, oops, here we go. Yep, there we go. I think I said solar eclipse, I meant lunar. So here we have June 5th, a lunar eclipse in Sagittarius. And that's going to be as Venus is retrograde as well. So that one, and both the sun and the moon at that eclipse will be square to Mars and Neptune. So that eclipse is really going to be quite powerful because of all the planets involved, especially the T-square with Neptune. This is a beginning of eclipses happening in Sagittarius and Gemini that are going to start focusing very deeply on the subject of the mind, faith, reason, and the combination of a strong intellect and a strong sort of objective, rational intellect, skepticism, doubt, critical thinking, pitted against Jupiter, who is the planet that's more associated with the dogma, the doctrines, the teachings that hold things together, the commitment of our beliefs and faith. A period of time that we're going through with eclipses in these two signs that have a lot to do with questioning, reframing, restructuring our belief systems. And this goes along with Jupiter being in conjunction with Jupiter for most of the year. This is happening as the eclipses are changing signs into Jupiter and Mercury signs, signs that often lead to deep, lasting, intellectual, spiritual, and philosophical, or even educational shifts in our lives. So that gets started with the lunar eclipse on June 5th. Now, I mentioned the eclipses in Cancer and Capricorn in June and July as well. So we're going to go forward to the next big transit of the year, which doesn't take place until a little bit later in the year. We get to about September 9th. And on September 9th, what we're going to see is Mars beginning to station in the sign of Aries. Now, the reason that this one is really significant is because we've got a long Mars retrograde in the sign of Aries, and it's going through squares to Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter via its retrograde. And you're going to see this play out as Mars retrogrades here. Here it comes into a square with Saturn around the end of September. It's going to go down into a square with Pluto, right, by mid-October. And then it's going to get pretty close in, here it comes, there we are, to the square to Jupiter by later October. And then finally, Mars is going to settle down towards the middle of November and turn direct again, right about the 15th. Now, seems like a lot, right? Like that's a big, very powerful Mars in its own domicile in Aries. So a lot of martial things, will, force, muscle, strength, action, conflict, etc. And it's going through squares to the immovable Saturn, the one who doesn't want to go anywhere. So an unstoppable force meets the immovable object. That's kind of one of the themes. Battles and struggles of will. And then you've got Mars, going through its square to Jupiter, a lot to do again with the conviction and strength of beliefs. Pluto, this transformative, cathartic dynamic. It's a really powerful time where there's a lot of action, upheaval, drama, etc. It's in the peak of election season. So it's going to be a pretty dramatic end of the year. And there might be some degree of violence, hostility, conflict, just kind of brewing in the air. But one thing that's really nice about Mars's retrograde in general is that Mars retrograde oftentimes, because Mars tends to be a more action-oriented planet, sometimes you just get a little bit better brake pads on and a little bit better control of the brakes on the car. And that could be a positive thing where some attempt to attack or do something in a direct manner, or someone trying to hurt or harm is sort of blocked or slowed down, or our worst and most impulsive instincts are being curbed, and we're learning how to control our anger, or we're learning how to use our will more constructively. Issues around anger and frustration, a lot of healing potential there for us as well. So this is, I think it's a really, actually, I think it's going to be a fantastic transit. But it just has that feeling of a little bit of a pressure cooker from like, yeah, what, September 9th, basically into, I think it was, what did we say? It was like November, mid-November. So a couple of months there, a good month of October at least, most of September and October, where we are figuring out, you know, the gas and the brake pedal simultaneously, figuring out how to work them together in a better way at a time where there's you know, there's a potentially very combative energy, and we're trying to figure out how to use it wisely and maturely without being too conservative. Holding back action too much would be a problem. Going forward too strong or willfully or destructively would be a problem. There's going to be a lot of intensity around our beliefs and our thoughts and our ideals around that time with Mars square Jupiter. Very cathartic and potentially destructive and purgative and rebirthing with Mars square Pluto. And then, you know, after it moves forward, it's going to go through them all again. I mean, let's just give you that really quick. So Mars will then go forward, right? And it's going to hit the square to Pluto again by the end of the year, right around the solstice, right as Jupiter and Saturn are conjoined in Aquarius, which is basically the last big transit of the year as well. So that, you know, it's like they come back through really intensely. And then Mars will enter Taurus in the very beginning of 2021 and move right into squares to Saturn and Jupiter again. So, you know, Mars action the last half of like basically in August, but you'll feel it for sure from like the fall, late summer through the end of the year. That's what I meant to say. A lot of Mars action. Okay. Then November 30th and December 14th, now we have the eclipses fully changing signs. And that means, show you guys this. So here we go. Where I lost my place. December 14th, yeah. So December 14th, here is the solar eclipse in Sagittarius. This has the feeling of a kind of hopeful, bright, optimistic, philosophical new beginning. Really like that. And then we have a lunar eclipse in the lunar eclipse is, where am I? Yeah, wait a sec. No. Go back. Actually, it goes back a little ways. I messed up. Sorry, guys. My first one is actually the lunar eclipse on November 30th. So we've got a lunar eclipse first on November 30th in Gemini, and then it's followed by the solar eclipse in Sagittarius on December 14th. Again, same axis being worked that I talked about earlier with Sagittarius and Gemini, the intellectual, mercurial, and the more philosophical, the broader overarching structures of belief, learning, morality, philosophy, etc. And a time of healthy questioning, restructuring, committing, and shifting our minds and our thoughts and our beliefs and the way that they play a role in our life, as well as the importance of these things in our relationships. Can't underestimate that, with Venus also retrograde in 2020 in Gemini. So then the end of the year, the big finale, is December 17th. This is just huge. December 17th. I mean, this one and the Saturn Pluto maybe at the beginning of the year, they're kind of bookending the year. And Saturn and Jupiter, first of all, on the 17th, Saturn enters Aquarius again. Remember, it had backed out back after retrograding in the spring, and then it comes back in December. Now it's there to stay for several years in the sign of Aquarius. And right on the heels of it, on the 19th, Jupiter's going to enter Aquarius. So now you've got these two planets together, and then they're going to conjoin on the 21st. Literally, like, solstice energy, you know, is going to be pretty bonkers at the end of the year, because you've got a Saturn Jupiter conjunction. And I'll be doing, a long series on that conjunction for sure. But Jupiter Saturn is like, here's the god of spring, Jupiter, and the god of winter, Saturn. Here's the planet of newness, of restoring and creating or restoring a sense of moral, spiritual, ethical, educational unity in the cosmos, the sense of Rita, the sense of harmonia, that greater sense of cosmic justice, truth, and beauty that gives us a sense of coherence in life that we need, that we live by. The importance of that is going to be so stepped up, so amplified, and we're going to be feeling the need to secure it, Saturn, to lock it down, to give it structure and form and commitment. And that's going to come in right around the solstice. Of course, Saturn represents winter and endings and impermanence. And so when the two planets come together, there's also this sense of an old order dying and a new one being born, or some unique synthesis between an old way of doing something, or maybe more traditional or conservative way of doing something, and something that's more progressive, youthful, hopeful, and new. So the old and the young, generational potential for conjunction here as well. So I think it's going to be a really interesting time. I can't help but note again that this is coming, all this energy at the end of the year comes right through election season. But the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is also unique because we're shifting fully into air signs for the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions now for several hundred years, I believe. And the air signs, of course, were called humane, which means that the potential for new systems that are more humane is there. And Aquarius is a great sign for trying to create things that are lofty, noble, ideal, but sometimes can suffer from being a little bit rigid or dogmatic. It's important to remember that even our most progressive, seemingly progressive values can become dogmatic. They can become something that we hang the ego on. There is a reason that the further you go on the circle of political interests, further to the right, further to the left, keep going, and they meet in the middle on the other side. So, fanaticism, dogmatism, where fundamentalism of any kind, especially those that are in the name of progress and hope and a better future, etc., on either the left or the right, could also be amplified in 2020. But this is a year where we're really evaluating the moral, spiritual fiber of our lives and having to face shadows there and do some deep work. So that's what I have for you guys. I think 2020 is going to be an awesome year. I think that, month by month, I consider it my job to try to give you a sense of not only these transits, but the more transient, fast-moving planetary transits that are part of these larger transits that are triggering them or participating within them. Month by month, we walk through the year together. And I'm not big on setting intentions because I prefer to be in the position of not really knowing what I want, not really knowing what I need, having open arms and an open heart and a willingness to serve. In Bhakti Yoga, we consider that to be maybe at the core of our yoga practice, just the willingness to serve, to be an instrument of grace and God's love in the world, and really to just try to help people with astrology. If I have an intention, it's just to use astrology in a way that helps people understand the lay of the land and to be able to see heaven, or the eternal, the divine, here infused within the common everyday experiences of life that we're having, so that we remember that we are these beautiful angelic method actors upon the stages of our lives. We can act the part very deeply, give it our best, give it our heart, give it our soul, while also remembering that this lifetime and this particular body are not my first and probably not my last, and my nature is eternal. And the archetypes of astrology help us to remember the eternal in the midst of these experiences. Sometimes we place so much weight on the outcomes. The ancient study of astrology called apotelesmatics, the study of outcomes. We place so much weight on the study of outcomes in our lives, the anxiety about outcomes. Astrology is a way of helping us see heaven already here with us in the midst of the everyday walk of life, not necessarily being obsessed with outcomes. But it's an irony that we study outcomes as a way of helping us to be more present and a little bit more detached from the outcomes, redefining our sense of happiness in terms of the quality of our being. Can we see ourselves as alive and real without birth ultimately and without death ultimately, the impetus shifts from what's going to happen, because it's like, well, lots of stuff, because apparently this doesn't have a beginning and it doesn't have an ending, life. It shifts from the obsession about what's coming to the interest in love and the quality of our relationships with each other and with reality itself. So if astrology can help us deepen our relationships and become falling in love with the divine in each other, in the world, and ultimately with the divine source that we're a part of, then I think astrology is doing what it was designed to do. So that's my promise for you, is that I'll be here in 2020, going month by month, day by day, trying to lay it all out and give us a sense that we're walking home together, as the late Ram Dass said. So I hope you all have a very, very beautiful 2020. Remember, there's just a little bit of time left in my annual Kickstarter. I'd love to have your support. I think we're about, 21 backers away now, with 42 hours left to breaking the 600 backer mark. That would be awesome if we get there. But thank you either way. And I wish you a very blessed 2020. Take care, everyone.